Пані і панове, доброго ранку, доброго дня, Україна і світ! Вас вітають фантастичні токс. Українське ютуб-шоу про фентезі, фантастику, авторів, книги і абсолютно все, що турбує нас у нашому улюбленому жанрі. І сьогодні ми відкриваємо перше у 2023 році авторське інтерв'ю на підтримку Збройних сил України та перемоги України. І сьогоднішнім гостем буде автор роману «Безніч» Джей Крістофф. Welcome, Jay. It's so nice to have you here today.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me. It's great to talk to you. And hello to everybody who tuned in.
Нагадаємо, хто ми такі і хто сьогодні задаватиме запитання нашому автору. Мене звати Дар'я Піскозуб, я українська письменниця, авторка технофентезі «Машина». Перша книга вже на додруці, друга ось скоро вже вийде теж піде на друк. І я сьогодні гратиму свою звичну роль людини, що не може сидіти на одному стільці. Я буду питати, перекладати і втручатися несамовито.
Мене звуть Ірина Грабовська, я авторка середньовічного фентезі «Зірки і кіски», а також стімпанк-біології Леобург. Так що я сьогодні тільки буду питати. Наталя у нас, мабуть, щось з коннекшеном в неї.
Привіт, я Наталя.
Кажи, Наталю.
Чути мене?
Так. Чути, кажи.
Так, мене звати Наталя Довгопол, я письменниця, пишу історичне, фантастичне і пригодницьке. І також хочу нагадати, що у нас зараз є збір, і от ви бачите зараз картку в нас в коментарях, так? Це збір для Дімки Ужасного, для нашого друга, для Бабая на 56-ту Маріупольську бригаду. I will say it in English for Jay also, that my name is Natalia, and I'm also a writer, and I'm writing a fantastic historical and adventurous fiction. And I would like also to announce that today we will gather some donations for the Starlinks, for our friend who is also a fiction writer, horror fiction writer, and who is fighting now in the East on the first. So we're collecting money for him and his brigade.
Отже, як працюватиме наше інтерв'ю? Нагадаю, востаннє, любі друзі, ми задаватимемо запитання англійською. Текст питання ви будете бачити у нас на екрані, а наш автор чутиме його англійською. Після цього він матиме стільки часу, скільки йому необхідно, аби дати відповідь, і я запишу абсолютно все, або не все, як дасть боженько, і намагатимусь перекласти все, що говорить автор. В будь-який момент готуйте свої запитання, і ми все дамо запитання нашому авторові. Ну що, поїхали? So, you ready? Let's go.
Yeah, I have the first question. First of all, I liked very much your Nevernight, the first book, because we have only one book published yet, and I'm thrilled to have the second book of the trilogy. And my question is, the world of Nevernight is an incredible mesh of the Roman Empire and Venice, along with some alien fauna and magic. And what inspired you to create such a world? And what is your typical world building process?
I mean, inspiration for different parts of the books comes from different places. So Mia, as a character, I tend to be... Sorry, first I should say, again, thanks to everyone for tuning in. It's very strange to think that you guys are going through something pretty extraordinary and horrible in your country right now. You know, I'm halfway across the world in Australia, and we only read about the things that you guys are living through every day. So it means an extraordinary amount that we can get together and talk about books in what... you know, it's really troubling and extraordinary times that you guys are living in. So the fact that we can take an hour today and talk about something as simple as books while you guys are living through incredible and interesting times is extraordinary. So I hope you guys are as well as can be, given the circumstances. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I don't know whether Daria wants to translate that now, or
you can go.
You should translate that now.
Okay. So
you sure? Okay.
Okay, let me try then
No,
and
you
translate
go.
it.
You go. Sure.
Отже, натхнення для створення безночі прийшло із різних частин, адже різні ідеї та аспекти надихнули різні речі. Якщо говорити про Мію Корвере, головну героїню роману «Безніч», то ось тут наш гість робить невеличку зупинку і каже, що перш за все страшенно дякую, що прийшов до нас нині, страшенно вдячний, що ми тримаємо, що ми перемагаємо, що ми боремось за своє виживання. Йому дивовижно і неймовірно відчувати, що ось він є за половину світу від нас, і він лише читає, бачить у новинах про ці страшні речі, а ми у них прям живемо, і ми просто чудово справляємось. Тому ще раз і ще раз наш автор дякує, що він міг з нами нині тут бути.
So yes, everyone be safe, and the world is watching, and we're all with you. So be careful. So as far as the inspiration for the books go, different parts came from different places. So I tend to be a very visual writer. I was trained in the visual arts when I went to university. I studied graphic design, and most of the ideas that I have that I write tend to begin visually. So Mia as a character. She started as there's a cartoon character in Western culture. I'm not sure if you guys are even aware of her. She's called Emily the Strange. She's a little goth girl surrounded by black cats. If you Google her after the interview, you'll see what I mean. And I imagined Emily the Strange as an older girl. Emily's about 10 years old, and I just imagined her aged up, what she would look like when she was 17. And I gave her a broadsword, and that's kind of the visual imagery that started Mia in my head. But in terms of the world and the background, I'm a bit of a history buff, and Italy is one of my favorite places in the world. I know a lot about ancient Roman history and Merchant Prince Venice era history in Italy. And so I kind of combined elements of both of those time periods and those settings together and threw in a little bit that was fantastical, and that was the foundation of the world. Mia's backstory started as a thought experiment about Julius Caesar, who was the first dictator. He started the Imperium in Rome, and he was a very famous general, and he had a wife and daughter, and I started to think what would have happened to them. His wife and daughter had his rebellion against the Roman Senate failed, and so Mia is kind of a mirror image of Julia, who is Julius's daughter, imagining what would have happened if this famous general had marched on his capital and instead of taking it over, had instead been defeated in his campaign. So what would have been the fallout to his family? So that was kind of the thought experiment, I guess, that started Mia's backstory in my head. But I drew bits and pieces from all over the place. It's it's a pretty expansive work, and I take inspiration from all over.
Тож, якщо говорити про те, як приходять ідеї загалом про світ і як з'явилася безніч, то одразу слід зауважити, що Джей дуже візуальна людина, освіту, яку він здобув, власне, як графічний дизайнер, що для нього усі ідеї зазвичай починалися із якогось візуального образу. Якщо говорити про Мію Корвере, протагоністку роману «Безніч», усе почалося із мультяшного персонажу Емілі Дивна, яка є популярна в англомовному світі. Це така собі дівчинка із великою кількістю чорних котиків, якій є близько 10 років. А Джей задумався, а що як зробити ось цю Мію старшою, що як дати їй в руки меча і послати подрібнювати людей на дрібну капусточку. І якщо говорити про світ, то Джей великий любитель історії, особливо це стосується Італії, яку він неймовірно любить, і він добре доволі знає історії як Римської імперії та і подальших століть, скажімо, Венеційської держави тощо. І у «Безночі» він спробував переосмислити історію Юлія Цезаря, першого диктатора Римської імперії. Він задумався, а що було би, якби його повстання проти Сенату, унаслідок якого він і став, власне, диктатором, було неуспішним. успішним. Ми знаємо з історії, що у Юлія Цезаря була дружина і була донька. Доньку звали Юлія. Що ж би трапилося, якби повстання було неуспішним? Що би трапилося, власне, із донькою та дружиною? Тож у цьому плані Мія доволі такий, як Юлія. І якщо говорити про якісь інші деталі, то їх було дуже багато із дуже різних джерел, тому що, власне, натхнення приходить із найбільш неочікуваних закапелків свідомості. So moving on, we've actually reached out to the translator of the Nevernight Chronicles in Ukrainian, who is, I think, as far as I know, is currently working on the next installments in the trilogy.
Oh, cool.
So hopefully the readers will be able to see, and that's a red siren, but we're not paying attention to it. So she actually had a question to ask of you, and that is something that is very close to us as Ukrainians. So in the book, the Empire is this evil force.
The air alert is over.
I'm sorry. The Empire is this evil creature that lives off essentially as a parasite on the other peoples of the world. And yes, it has its high culture. It has a sort of civilizational purpose or goal in existing, but you can see that it's vile, that it's sort of a poison. It's a structural force that's oppressing the world. And that is something that we as Ukrainians understand very well as a part of the people that used to be colonized. But we also were wondering of how do people come to this approach? What is essentially this road that took you to think of this view, to see this white Eritrean man's burden?
I mean, a lot of the inspiration that I drew to build Atreya, it's based on ancient Rome, which was a conquering colonial power that took over most of the Mediterranean and spread its culture through conquest. But one of the other things that I wanted to touch on, the idea that there was a war between the gods, and that what you think of traditionally as the good side, the light side, the sun, won and the night was banished. If you're talking about traditional storytelling structures, light is good and dark is bad, day is good and night is evil. So what would happen if you built a world around the notion that the light had won, but it wasn't everything that it was cracked up to be? The idea that things are out of balance in the Republic is, I can't talk too much about it because you guys haven't read book 2 and book 3 yet, but that's one of the important parts of the meta structure of the book. The idea that if one side is in dominance, no matter which side, then everyone underneath that structure is going to suffer. That we need balance between opposing forces. We need people with differing ideas about what is right and what is wrong to come together and reach some kind of consensus. And when one ideology, one way of thought, one religion reaches ascendancy too far, that ends up crushing everything underneath it. So yeah, that was one of the ideas that I wanted to experiment with. But also, I like the idea. One of the fundamental things that I try to build into any world is that power comes with a price. And Mia is a character who manipulates the darkness. She can control shadows. If she's left to her own devices in a regular world, she's a superhuman. She would be out of balance with everything around her. She'd be able to dominate any opponent. So I wanted to build weaknesses into the world that would challenge her as a person and a character. So she can manipulate darkness, but she lives in a world where there is no darkness. There's darkness 2.5 weeks every 3 years, and every other minute of every other day, the sun is out all the time. So that was also a way to kind of keep her in check as well. But yeah, balance is one of the most fundamental ideas built into the trilogy, I think. The need for balance, I guess, is a better way to put it.
Yeah. Sorry, we have a little comment and question: how to pronounce correctly Mia Korverre or Korverre, or how to spell it?
Where is the stress in?
It depends. I used to say Corvere, but it's the idea, the etymology of the name, the root of the name is Latin. And I found out when I visited Italy that the correct pronunciation in Latin would be Corvere. So her name is Mia Corverre.
Yeah,
I was mispronouncing it myself though, and I wrote the characters. So if you've been saying it different, that's okay. That's fine. Pronounce it however you like.
It's like with Harry Potter, when all of the world tells Voldemort, and the author is like, nope, Voldemort, because T at the end is not readable because it's
silent T.
French.
Yeah, that's right. It's French. Correct. Yeah.
Тож, оскільки книга «Безніч» будується на історії Римської імперії, вочевидь, що ми зачіпаємо тему завойовника народу, що підкорив, по суті, ціле Середзем'я. І при цьому ми вплітаємо ще одну думку про те, що а що як між богами є певна стіна, що як була сутичка між добром і злом, і добрі боги виграли. І ми дуже чітко розуміємо цю дихотомію, вона дуже властива людям, і вона дуже глибоко продирається. Ніч погана, день добрий, темрява погана, світло хороше. І у світі Мії добро і світло перемогло. Але темрява зникла, та зло не зникло. Зникли певні аспекти світу, однак вони досі живуть. І великою темою книги є баланс. Якщо принаймні одна зі сторін є сильнішою, якщо принаймні одна зі сторін домінує, то інша стагнує, і все, що стосується іншої сторони, стає, по суті, починає, власне, страждати. Якщо це надягнути на тему певної країни, то коли одна культура, мова, релігія перемагає, починає сильно поширюватись, це змушує інші страждати, це притісняє, применшує та, по суті, знищує інші. І зрештою, також мені дуже хотілося розкрити, що влада приходить стіною. Якщо сказати про Мію, у неї є величезна суперсила. Вона може управляти темрявою, вона подорожує крізь тіні, вона може огортатися ними. І це відбувається у світі, де немає темряви, тому що є 3 сонця, які світять у різний час, і просто-напросто немає тіні. У нашому світі Мія була б супергероїною, мені ж хотілося дати їй трохи челендж, дати їй трошки балансу, аби її сили були співмірні із викликом, який кидає їй світ.
Before asking Mike, I would also like to show this is our colleague, and it's related to my question, because I was also very inspired by this word that you have created. And for me, it was a bit of a question. Like, is Mia a heroine or is she an anti-heroine? What is her journey? And where is the, what is the morale? Is there a morale? Is it gray? At first, we learn about her ambitions as a killer, and we see her ruthless, we see her quite unprincipled, and then we see that she pays for the stolen goods, and she cares about her friends. So for me, this development was very important in this story, and but she's still a professional killer. So the question is, how for you was to create this gray morale world where the teens are trained to be assassins, and the teachers are more cruel than the executors?
Yeah, I mean, I would consider her an anti-heroine. I don't think she's a hero in the traditional sense of the word. She's the protagonist, obviously, so she's central to the story, and her journey is the one that the reader is following. So the reader needs to care about her as a character. They may not necessarily like her all the time, because she certainly does some pretty awful things over the course of the novel and the trilogy. But it was important for me to always give her a reason to be doing the things that she was doing, even if you didn't necessarily agree with what she was doing. It was important for me that you could understand why she was doing it. She's a character that, you know, she considers family the most important thing in the world. Her entire motivation is avenging the family that was taken away from her. And, you know, over the course of her journey, she does do some pretty horrible things. She's not a nice person. She's, you know, she's ruthless, and she's vindictive, and she's vain. She's ruled by her temper a lot of the time. But it was really important for me to provide a reason for all the things that she did, and to show that she was, you know, she does have a soft side. She kind of keeps it hidden behind this armor that she wears around herself all the time. But she does care for the people around her. She does care for her friends. She does, you know, pay for things that she steals. She kind of is a killer with a heart of gold, but at the same time, she is a killer. She kills hundreds of people, even in just that first book. So I don't think by any stretch you could consider her a hero in the sense of the word. You know, she's selfish. Everything that she does is motivated by her desire for revenge. And she might be nice to people along the way. She might look out for people that she cares about along the way, but her fundamental motivation is to avenge herself against the people who wronged her. And she will do almost anything. But I guess where you draw that line, the line beyond which she won't step, and she kind of has that line constantly challenged throughout the trilogy, that really defines her as a character. She's not a good person, but she's not an evil person either. She does have kindness and softness inside, but she's been through some pretty horrible things in her life, and she kind of needs to keep that locked up tight inside her, and only let it out with people that she really trusts, and those are few and far between. So yeah, she's a really interesting character to write. She's a lot of fun. But yeah, I don't think you could ever call her a hero. She does some pretty bad things over the course of the books. So I look forward to you guys reading the other two and seeing what you think of her at the end of them.
There you mute. Yeah.
So before we actually get to translating, I actually wanted to let you know that we're currently being viewed by 65 people on YouTube.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's extraordinary because it's Saturday morning. It's like very early for viewing YouTube. I mean, like I would not be up and ready to view YouTube like this early. So yeah, that just shows that you do have some big fan base here.
That's amazing.
Переходячи до запитання, Мія Корвере точно не героїня, швидше за все, антигероїня. Я не завжди її люблю. Тут, коли я кажу «я», це не я, а я автор. Але мені необхідно було давати причину для того, аби пояснити, з якого такого лиха робить таку пакость наша героїня. У випадку Мії це, власне, її родина. Те, що з нею трапилося, те, що пережила Мія в дуже юному віці, це те, що спонукає, це те, що не дає їй зупинитися, і це те, що зрештою штовхає її на страшні речі. І Мія справді робить страшні речі. Вона вбивця, вона без вагань просто розкриває горлянки і насправді не вагається причинити зло. Та й при цьому має насправді не найпозитивніший характер. Вона мстива, вона має таку велику гординю, вона, по суті, має повну відсутність якогось такого базового милосердя, але при цьому вона справді переживає. І вона переживає за людей, яких вона підпускає і вважає, що окей, ось є страшний світ, якому я повинна причинити помсту, і ось є люди, яких я ближче до себе підпущу. За них вона переживає, вона намагається зробити все, аби у них все було добре. І коли вона краде, вона повертає гроші за це вкрадене. І при цьому я дуже попросив, щоб ми не називали її героїною. Власне, тому що в ній немає нічого геройського. Вона егоїстка, вона працює над тим, що їй необхідно, і ця ціль так зрозуміла, так, це ціль, що шматує і задає тобі на роки вперед розвиток, але при тому це її, власне, егоїстична ціль. Зрештою, я би сказав, що Мія не є добра людина, але вона і не є лиха. Вона не героїня, але вона людина, що робить страшні речі, не вагаючись, і при цьому вона не бажає повністю піддаватися злості. І це насправді дуже те, що визначає її, те, що вона має всередині якийсь компас, і це виливається в важливі вибори в самих книгах. Ми не можемо говорити трошки детальніше, адже зрештою лише перша книга трилогії була видана українською.
Yeah, and we have one small question from our patron, and he asks, where did the idea of three sons and the Never Night come from?
It goes back to what I was saying before. So one of the fundamental principles that I write all my books with is the idea that power needs to come with limitation, and power needs to come with a price. Because otherwise, if you don't put restrictions on your magic system or your hero's power set or whatever, they very quickly become godlike, and the only thing that can kill a god is another god. So as a writer, you need to put limitations on a character. Even if they can do amazing things, they need to either pay a price for those amazing gifts, or they need to have some kind of weakness built into them. Even Superman has kryptonite. So I settled on the idea that Mia was going to have shadow power. She'd be able to manipulate the darkness. That sat pretty well with her being an assassin. But if you leave that character to their own devices, they very quickly start to overpower everything around them. So I quickly settled on the idea of a world where it was light all the time. So you have the ability to manipulate the darkness, but big deal, there isn't much darkness built into the world. And after that, I started to think about what a world like that would actually be like. First of all, whether it was possible, whether you could have a world that existed in a trinary star system. I actually have a friend of mine who's an astrophysicist, and I asked her to work up a map of this solar system to see if it was mathematically possible to have a planet that experienced 2.5 weeks of daylight in a 2-year nighttime cycle. And her name is Sana, and I'm not sure about the Ukrainian translation, but that's the name of the goddess of fire in the book. She's part of the pantheon, so I made her a goddess to say thank you for doing all that mathematics, because I'm not an astrophysicist. And I don't know anything about astrophysics, but yeah, she went away with her husband and they did a bunch of maths, and yeah, she presented me a model for this solar system wherein a planet could have 2.5 weeks of sunlight every 2 years. So yeah, it started out as an idea that would limit Mia as a character, that would put checks and balances on her power set. But very quickly it became a much bigger idea. You know, obviously you build a world where it's day all the time. That's going to affect everything about the culture and the way people live. You know, the idea that if you're staying in a hotel, usually in our world, the rooms that are up the top are the most expensive. But in Utreya, the rooms that are in the basement are the most expensive because they're actually out of the sunlight. But so yeah, it very quickly became a much bigger idea. And ended up, again, I can't talk too much about it because you guys haven't read book 2 and book 3 yet, but it becomes a really fundamental part of not only the world building, but Mia's story in general and the overall narrative. So the war between the light and the dark has much more importance in the later 2 books in the series. So it very quickly became a much bigger idea, but initially it started out as a way to limit Mia's power.
Отже, перш ніж я перекладу, любі друзі, наші глядачі, ми готові збирати запитання від аудиторії, задавати їх Джею. Однак я дуже попрошу вас без спойлерів. Якщо ми обмежуємося запитаннями, які не заспойлерять українським читачам другої, третьої книги «Хронік Безночі», на жаль, ми будемо змушувати видалити питання, які є спойлерні, бо ми підтримуємо українського видавця, і дуже би хотіла, аби кожен міг прочитати, власне, український переклад книги. Якщо говорити про те, звідки прийшло натхнення для «Трьох сонць», то тут однозначно відповідь у тому, що, знову ж таки, будь-яка влада має свої слабкості та свої обмеження. І, зрештою, навіть у Супермена є криптоніт, який його знищує. Якщо не дати вашому персонажу щось, що його обмежує, і що робить його слабшим, він стане богом, і тоді лише інший бог зможе його скинути. Та й, зрештою, це не так уже й цікаво. Якщо Мія працювала із темрявою тінями, мені необхідно було, аби тіней було якнайменше. І я задумався, а чи можливий світ, де немає ночі, власне, де є безніч, де завжди є світло. У мене є подруга астрофізикиня, яку я попросив розкласти для мене таку велику гіпотезу, а що якби була планетарна система із 3 світилами, які почергово працювали. Ця моя подруга склала величезну мапу, модель, яка би показала, як би виглядав світ, де, по суті, 2,5 тижні постійне сонячне світло і справжня ніч зустрічається лише раз у 2 роки. За це Джей, насправді, зробив її богинею у книзі. Одна із богинь в романі «Власне» названа на честь цієї подруги. Тож, любі друзі, це ще одна причина для вас дружити із письменниками. Оце обмеження сили Мії, зрозуміти, як знайти темряву у світі, де 3 сонця, що постійно сяють, це те, що стримувало Мію, і те, що повинно було бути фольгою навколо її розвитку як персонажки. Однак у книгах 2 і 3 «Хронік Безночі» ця світобудова стає на центральну, по суті, позицію. Нас чекає велика битва між світлом і темрявою.
Okay, so we have a few questions from our viewers now. And this one is about an irony that you, Jay, use in your books, which I also love. The irony, the humor in the book is essential. It's something that drags you, and it makes you read more. And questions about the Empire of the Vampire, but I think it's in any book of yours, Nevernight. So what does it come naturally, or do you think how to make them stand out, your phrases, your wits?
I'm glad.
And swearing, so yes.
Oh, I mean, swearing comes naturally. I mean, I'm Australian. We tend to be we tend to curse quite fluently in Australia. I'm glad that the books are funny. I mean, that's because I tend to write in very dark worlds and tend to deal with very heavy subject matter and characters that are morally grey. I try and insert as much humor as I can. Otherwise, the books just become too dark and depressing, and the characters become unlikable. One of the ways that you can make readers like a character quickly is if they can make them laugh, even in the face of, you know, terrible things happening around them and terrible settings in which they live. If they can make the reader smile, then very quickly the reader will find that, you know, that character is kind of working away.
My character is the cat.
Yeah, Mr. Kindly. Yeah, that's one of the express purposes I put him in the book for, because Mia is, you know, she's super serious. She's a character who's driven to avenge herself against the murderers of her family. She's studying to become an assassin with the sole goal of going out and killing these people. You know, that's a dark character with some pretty serious issues and outlooks on life. If you were just solely concentrating on her, the book would become really heavy. So Mr. Kindly is there both to offer some comedic relief. You know, he inserts moments of levity even into really dark and horrible situations. But he's also a way to make Mia look at herself. He serves a function kind of like Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio does. He's the one who is honest with her when nobody else is, because he knows her better than even she knows herself sometimes. So he can talk to her in a way that kind of cuts through that armor that she's put around herself and cuts through the lies that she tells herself. He can be honest with her even when she can't be honest with herself. But he does it in an amusing way. You know, sometimes when someone is giving you some hard truths, you know, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, is the old saying. So yeah, he tries to make you smile even when he's telling you that you're being an idiot. But I'm glad that some of the humor translates, because, you know, I don't speak or read Ukrainian, so I kind of have to trust my publishers can find a translator who can get those English idioms and word plays in a way that works for you guys. So I'm really glad to hear that has translated. That's really cool to hear.
Матюки дуже природно приходять до нашого автора, тому що він австралієць. І ви не знайдете австралійця, що не матюкається безбожно. Якщо говорити про гумор, то світи Джея дуже темні, здебільшого доволі депресивні і повні страждань. Тож додавання гумору – це те, що допомагає розвіяти оцю непроникну тьму, дати трошки контексту, радості і, можливо, легкості в моменти, які б без цього гумору були б дуже складні. Якщо, наприклад, назвати містера Добрика, кота Мії, кота із тіні, то, власне, такою є його ціль. Він у книзі він допомагає нам знайти мить розради, мить полегшення під час історії про те, як юна дівчина хоче повбивати купу людей, аби помститися за, по суті, за свою родину. Але разом з тим у нього є інша ціль. Він, по суті, певною мірою як совість нашої героїні. Він може пробитися крізь те, що вона сама собі говорить, те, що у чому вона сама себе переконує, для того, аби йти далі, йти чесно сама до себе. Тож гумор – це певною мірою і можливість розвіяти непроникну бентегу і додати моментів чесності персонажа із самим собою.
Well,
okay. And I see questions about the ekranizations of your books. Either you have, or maybe you already have some plans that we don't know. So if you'd like your books to be movies.
I mean, that would be great if it happens. Yeah, there's nothing that I can talk about. We've sold the rights to a few of our books. I think we've sold the rights to Illumine. We've sold the rights to Aurora. Something has happened with Empire that I can't talk about openly yet. But yeah, it would be great if it happened. Like, you have to be careful when you hand over it's like handing over your baby to a stranger. They could do a wonderful job with it, or they might do a terrible job. There's been great adaptations and there's been bad ones. So hopefully you sign up with the right team who has the right ideas in mind. But when it's done well, it can be amazing. So yeah, it would be great to see any of my stories up on the big screen one day. Fingers crossed. But yeah, there's nothing that I can really talk about at the moment. But yeah, hopefully more news soon.
You know, I can't say anything is not the same as no. So you kind of answered, and the rest is left to imagination. Якщо говорити про екранізації творів Джея Крістоффа, то вже продані права на екранізацію на Аврору, на файли ілюмінатів, щось відбувається, щось трапилось із імперією вампірів, про що наш автор не може говорити. І Безніч, та страшенно хотілося б бачити екранізацію Безночі. Певною мірою, коли ти бачиш, як з твоєї книги роблять екранізацію, це ніби віддавати свою дитиночку комусь. І хочеться знайти когось, хто, власне, зрозуміє її, полюбить її і інтерпретує так, як, власне, ти замислював.
Yeah, okay. I have another question, and you partially answered it because you said that the visualization is very important, but let's elaborate on it. So, in the setting of Empire of the Vampire, that hasn't come out yet in Ukrainian, but vampires are very classical, and the powerful armor of the silver science warrior are very tightly connected to their faith. How did the idea of such an anti-vampire weapon appear? And also, silver signs are very visual and definitely inspire fans to come up with a hot fan arts. How important is the visualization for you during the writing process?
It's usually where I start. Like I say, I was trained as a visual artist, so most of the books that I've written start with visual ideas. I had two visuals in my head when I was thinking about Empire. The first was a man standing at a window with bars on it, watching the sun go down. And that's kind of the opening scene of Empire. Gabriel, who's the main character in Empire, starts the book in captivity, and he tells the story of his life to his captors. So that visual that I had in my head ended up being the opening scene of the book. But the other visual that I had was a man fighting vampires in a crypt under the ground, and he was glowing with light. I didn't know why at the time. That was just the visual that I had in my head. So when I was thinking up ideas for the characters, that was the visual that I was kind of working on. But also it comes back. I'm a Dungeons and Dragons player. I've played Dungeons and Dragons since I was kind of 11 years old. And there is a spell in Dungeons and Dragons that I was kind of leaning on for inspiration as well. So I thought, it's a spell called Protection from Evil. Getting very nerdy on you now, but it's like an aura that certain characters have that help them fight against creatures of the darkness. And I thought it would be cool to incorporate that spell into someone's body to make the magic a part of their physicality. And also it would look really cool. The Empire novel is illustrated. It's the first time I've had illustrations in a novel that I've written. And I kind of worked hand in hand with an illustrator named Bon Orthwick, who she did the illustrations internally for the book, kind of how those tattoos would work and how that would work visually. So yeah, I'm a visually minded writer. When I'm writing a scene, the way I describe it, it's like there's a movie playing in my head, and I almost transcribe the pictures that I'm seeing in my head onto the page. So the visual aspect of characters is usually where I start. And coincidentally, that sometimes makes for some pretty amazing fan art. So I'm very lucky in that respect.
Книга «Імперія вампіра», якою ще немає українською, але ви можете допомогти цій книзі з'явитися українською, якщо ви будете просити видавців перекласти її, з'явилася у Джея із двох дуже конкретних візуальних ідей. Перше – це є чоловік у темниці, що дивиться крізь решітку на вікні, навзовні і думає про своє життя. Так народився Гейбріель, власне, персонаж, який розповідає про своє життя після того, як його захопили в полон. І друга ідея була чоловіка, що світився таким потужним сяйвом. Джей – знаний гравець у Dungeons and Dragons, він грав їх десь із 11 років, страшенно любить, і йому завжди хотілося написати про одне із заклять, яке згадується в Dungeons and Dragons, і це закляття називається «Захист від зла». Це така собі аура, що огортає вас і допомагає вам, по суті, бути незачіпленим лихими створіннями, з якими ви боретесь під час місії у Dungeons and Dragons. Також «Імперія вампіра» – це перша книга Джея, що була ілюстрована. Для нього це була величезна перевага і величезне щастя, бо як дуже візуальний письменник, для нього було неймовірним бачити інтерпретовані ті сцени, які з'являються в голові як, по суті, сценарій чи як трейлер фільму, і які він, зрештою, просто виписує. Йому дико пощастило із тим, що він зміг знайти видавництво, і він змогли знайти ілюстратора, що дуже точно передав його бажання, і, зрештою, в тому, що він може завдяки своєму стилю письма передати цю певну візуальність тексту. There is something I've really wanted to ask you. I think years before The Nevernight came out, because years before it came out, I read the Illuminate files in English.
Oh, sure.
And I do have it even
I see
here.
it there, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's almost falling apart because it's a very big book with a very soft cover that I've had for multiple years. And it was actually... it remained with me for many years after, essentially at the time that I became a writer and I released my first books, because of a couple of things. Most notably, because of the format of the book and the genre. When you think of a very high-speed, adventurous sci-fi with battleships, with space stations, with wormholes, you don't typically think of its format as being written in the transcript of surveillance cameras, of the chats that are registered in what seems to be almost like the Wikipedia for the specific planet or something. And also, it's a book written essentially in 2 or in 3, because firstly, you do have a co-author with whom you've written multiple books, which is Amy Kaufman. And secondly, because the book is super visual, and it's been illustrated by Mary Lou, which is another household name essentially in the genre. So what was the process of creating such a novel, such a trilogy? That must have been quite different. And was it the format that you've chosen once you've set on the story, or was it vice versa, that you think of, I have this wild idea, let's write down what people wrote in chats in space?
Originally, Illuminate started as a dream that Amy had. Amy and I were friends before we were co-authors together. Our first novels came out around about the same time. We both live in the same city, so we just became buddies, and we would get together and have brunch every month or so and just kind of talk about what was happening in our jobs. And one day she came in and said that she had had a dream. We wrote a book together. She couldn't remember what the book was about, but she remembered that the book was written entirely in email format. It was just people emailing each other back and forth. And so we started kicking around the idea of what that book might actually look like. So that was where Illuminate started as a thought. It was a dream that Amy had. And we decided to set it in space because we're both space nerds. We both kind of grew up watching Star Trek and Star Wars, and there wasn't a lot of science fiction being written in young adult at the time. So we thought we would give it a go, and it would be something different. But it wasn't until we stumbled on the idea of Aiden that the book really kind of came to life in our head. For those of you who haven't read it, Aiden is a computer that controls one of the battleships where most of the action of the novel happens. And it can see what is happening through the cameras all over its ship. But it has been damaged in an attack. And so it's gone slightly mad. And the way it perceives the events of the novel is represented visually on the page. So, for example, when space fighters are flying through space, shooting at each other, the typography will be laid out on the page, kind of tracking the path of the ships over the double page spread. So, what we did with the design of the book was to try and evoke through design elements what was actually happening in the story. And that kind of comes back to my original training as a graphic designer when I went to college. Once we stumbled on the idea of Aiden being a narrator and the way it perceived events actually dictating the way those events were presented on the page, then yeah, that was kind of like taking the handbrake off the book. Like we could do whatever we wanted at that point. And it's also important to note that we didn't think the book would ever get published. We thought the idea was just too strange. And so when we were writing that book initially, we were just writing it for fun. We didn't actually think it would ever get made into a book because it was just too weird. So that in a way kind of freed us to do whatever we thought would be good, would be fun, because we didn't think it would ever get onto a shelf. So there was no idea that was too silly. There was no idea that was too weird. And so yeah, I think that's why the book ended up being as strange and fun as it was, because we had a lot of fun writing it. But yeah, it was really, it all came out of the idea of a book being written in email format and us kind of expanding on that idea and going from there. Writing like no one was ever going to see it was really liberating.
Got it, thank you. Я почну переклад із звернення до українських видавців. Я вас дуже прошу, я буду кидати грошима в екран, я буду просто розкидатись ними наліво-направо, якщо ви видасте серію «Файли ілюмінатів». Я вас дуже прошу, і дівчата Наталі, Іра, почитайте, не пошкодуєте. Власне, серія книг під назвою «Файли ілюмінатів», написана у співавторстві з Емі Кауфман, почалася із сну, який приснився, власне, співавторці нашого гостя. Вони друзі, вони працюють і живуть в одному ж місті, вони щомісяця збиралися на бранч, поговорити, як життя, що всі робить. І одного дня сказала Емі, що їй приснився сон, що вони написали разом книгу, яка повністю складалася із імейлів. Весь сюжет складався із того, що люди обмінюються повідомленнями. І вони подумали, а чому би бляха і ні? І вирішили написати цю книгу, при тому одразу зійшлися на думці, що варто цю оповідь помістити у космос, тому що вони страшенно фанатіють від ідеї космосу. У дитинстві та юності вони фанатіли від Стартреку та від Зоряного шляху та Зоряних воєн. І їм страшенно бракувало класних оповідок про космос, власне, в молодіжному жанрі, в янкедалті. І так вони придумали, що давайте ми напишемо оповідь, у якій все, що відбувається, буде, власне, начебто щось було задокументовано, і ми вже постфактум дізнаємося історію. У нас є транскрипції і записів із камер спостереження, у нас є записи чатів, у нас є дуже велика кількість візуальних елементів, що розкривають історію. Скажімо, коли є перестрілка двох космічних кораблів, на сторінках ми бачимо, власне, що букви і слова складаються в візуальний патерн, який вказує на те, що ось є два кораблі і їхні патрони, їхні заряди стикаються. От тут дуже сильно пригодилося, власне, те, що за освітою Джей є графічним дизайнером, і йому допомагало це намагатися візуалізовувати історію, використовувати слова не лише як спробу дати форму історії, а дати форму в найбільш буквальному сенсі, в візуальному. І слід зауважити, що великим рушієм цієї книги був штучний інтелект на ім'я Айдан. Це є штучний інтелект, що керує космічним кораблем, на якому відбуваються всі події. Відбувається на початку книги невелика сутичка, і наш штучний інтелект їде кукухою. Він їде кукухою, і це потім впливає на те, як він бачить події, як він записує, і зрештою, що відбувається у самій книзі. Ця книга писалася на веселощах, на кайфі, і вони думали, що цю книгу хтось видасть, бо бляха-муха, це є епістолярний сайфай у космосі. Але книжка вийшла, і книжка класна, і насправді це почалося все і зі сну, і просто дуже великого фану двох людей, які хотіли розкрити свою власну пристрасть.
Yeah, and we have another comments and questions from the audience, and the one is Lotus War series has Japanese roots. From where did you get the inspiration for the series? Maybe in Japan exist some places which appeared in the book.
Again, the Lotus War started as a dream that I had. There was if you read into dream theory, I think I understand what the dream was about, but the visual that I had was a little boy standing in a field of grass, and he was in front of a griffin, and he was yelling at the griffin to try and make it fly. He was kind of screaming at it to spread its wings and lift off the ground, and it wouldn't fly. And I think that was my brain telling me, because I was writing another book at the time, and the book wasn't working. The book was kind of broken. And I think the little boy in the dream was me, and the griffin that I was yelling at, trying to make it fly, even though it wouldn't, was the book that I was working on. But that visual kind of stuck in my head, the idea of a little kid and a griffin. And so that was where the original visual inspiration came from. And you know, everything kind of built out from there. But I don't want to make it sound like all my ideas come from dreams, because those are the only two book series that have actually come from dream ideas. But yeah, The Lotus Wars and Illuminate both started with dreams. So I guess the lesson there is to be open to inspiration from anywhere, and even if you have an idea that you might think is silly while you're sleeping, jot it down, because it could turn out to be something good when you wake up in the morning.
Історія, про яку ви говорите, почалася для мене знову ж таки зі сну про маленького хлопчика, що стоїть на полі повному трави і бачить перед собою грифона. І він шпетає цього грифона, мовляв, лети, падлюко, лети. І цей образ був дуже сильним і запам'ятався авторові. І попри те, що в цей час Джей писав іншу книгу, яка зовсім не виходила, яка виходила якось коротше діло, така собі книженція була. Його не відпускав цей образ хлопчика і грифона. І зрештою, це єдині дві історії, окрім серії «Файли ілюмінатів», які він написав зі снів. Не переживайте, інші сни не продиктували йому нові історії, поки що, тут важливо зауважити. Але, мабуть, якщо винести з цього якийсь урок, то будьте готові до натхнення з усіх усюд, тому що воно може прийти звідки ви навіть не очікуєте, зокрема, навіть зі снів.
Actually, we have a lot of questions, but we can sit for a few more hours, but we know that the time is limited. So I would conclude with the last question, which is about music, because we have two questions about music. This one, so does music inspire you, and does your love of metal music inspire you in writing in any way? So you said about visual part. What about the music?
Yeah, I listen to music when I write all the time, but I tend to listen to either classical pieces or movie scores, movie soundtracks. And I can't listen to any music that has lyrics when I'm writing, because the words that are being sung tend to get in the way of the words that I'm trying to write. So what I'll often do is listen to music scores for movie soundtracks. So you know, that type of music is designed to inspire a particular emotion in the listener. If you're writing some big dramatic action piece, then you can listen to the soundtrack from an action movie. If you're writing something romantic or something sad, there's lots of movies out there and amazing composers who have built pieces of music designed specifically to make you feel that way. One of the composers that I listened to constantly when I was working on Evernight is an Italian composer named Ludovico Einaudi. He does kind of, they're piano pieces, but they have orchestral accompaniments. And even now, years later, when I listen to Einaudi, it kind of takes me right back into the world of Evernight. That particular composer is in my head like an integral part of the world and those characters. So yeah, when I'm writing, I try and find music that is evocative of the mood that I'm trying to establish. So yeah, and movie soundtracks are a really good source of that kind of emotional content that you can feed off. But in terms of metal music that I listen to all the time when I'm not writing, I draw a lot of inspiration from the lyrics in a lot of the bands that I love. You know, people tend to think of heavy metal music as kind of blunt and brutish and thuggish and not all that intellectual, but there's actually some really great lyricists and poets who are kind of fronting metal bands. So Architects, whose t-shirt I'm wearing at the moment, they do a lot of incredible introspective pieces, but also talking about problems in the world. There's another band, Lamb of God. They have two lyricists in that band, Mark Morton and Randy Blythe. And you know, they're basically modern day poets. You don't really make a living as a poet anymore, but if you're adept at poetry and lyricism in your words, then writing lyrics for a band is a pretty good way to make a living. So yeah, a lot of the ideas that get explored and themes that get explored in the music that I listen to tends to creep into the work that I'm writing. And what I'll try and do is I tend to take song titles that I'm listening to, and I'll often insert them as chapter titles in the books that I'm writing, just as a shout out to the bands that I was listening to that I was inspired by while I was writing. And I also thank them all in the back of the books. I was lucky enough to meet one of my favorite musicians, a guy named Rob Flynn, who's from the band Machine Head. They were on tour when I was actually living in Europe a couple of years ago. I was living in Prague working on Empire, and they did a show quite close to Prague, and I got to go along and meet the band and actually hand over a copy of Nevernight to him because he's a fantasy reader. And you know, I got to point to his name in the credits in the back of the book, saying, "Oh, that's you. You know, this is me saying thanks to you for all the inspiration that you give me." So yeah, it does play a big part, not necessarily when I'm writing, but certainly when I'm thinking about ideas that I want to explore and themes that I want to explore in the books. Yeah.
Once again, what is the name of that band?
Which one?
The one that you just mentioned, the last one that you met when you were living in Prague.
Machine Head is the name. Rob Flynn is the lead singer, and Machine Head is the band. Yeah.
So first of all, I relate to you about the soundtracks on so many levels. I listen once I'm not writing, and then when I'm writing, it's like epic soundtracks, and sometimes they combine. So I could be like just driving. There is some mega pop hit blasting through the speakers, and then after it finishes, it's like 2 steps from hell, epic soundtrack, and the whole car is like what is happening? Like where is the line between this and that? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like those pieces are designed to make you feel emotion. Like that's specifically what the composers are trying to do. They're trying to make you excited, or they're trying to make you sad, or they're trying to make you feel romantic or whatever. So it's actually a really good way to inspire you where you work, even if it's only working subconsciously.
So 2 translations. Здебільшого, коли Джей пише, він слухає музику, яка є саундтреками до фільмів, або ж, власне, інструменталкою, де немає ніяких слів, адже кожне слово може вирвати його із трансу, перефокусувати, змінити його думки, або ж, зрештою, збити просто з пантелику. І здебільшого тут може бути і конкретні саундтреки до певного настрою. Скажімо, якщо він пише сцену екшен, він буде слухати саундтреки із екшн-фільмів. Якщо він щось романтичне пише, то шукає сумненький саундтрек, аби так прям пробрати всі струники душі. І якщо згадати про конкретного композитора, який вплинув, наприклад, на Безніч, то є композитор Людовіко Анаурі, який написав саундтрек, який дуже-дуже близький до цього, до відчуття Італії, до відчуття безночі. І слухаючи його, він, мов би, ще раз і ще раз повертався до безночі. І якщо згадати, знову ж таки, про heavy metal, то Джей його великий фанат. І багато хто думає, що це буквально якесь кричання в мікрофон без поетики, без сенсу. Однак серед цього жанру є неймовірні тексти, заклики, робота соціальними та іншими темами. І от, скажімо, група The Architects дуже класно працюють із тематикою соціальною в їхніх піснях. Це буквально сучасні поети. Часом Джей навіть бере назви пісень, які він слухає, і робить їх назвами нових розділів. І класна історія є про групу Machine Head, яку страшенно Джей любить. Колись давним-давно він жив у Празі. На той час він писав «Імперію вампіра», і я вам кажу, в цей момент Наталя Матилінець має матеріалізуватися в чаті. Якщо не матеріалізується, то все, наша дружба закінчена. Одним словом, коли автор жив у Празі і працював над «Імперією вампіра», він зустрівся із вокалістом групи Machine Head, яку звати Роб Флін, і подарував йому книгу «Безніч», тому що соліст був страшним любителем фентезі, і завдяки цьому в одну з приміток до книг Джей зміг додати, що ось така класна музика, він нею надихався, тому спасибі за музику. So, I think that was it for our interview.
Also,
please go ahead.
and if I can add something, because there is some little thing that we forgot to tell at the beginning, but which is very important, because Nebo Book Publishing, your Ukrainian publisher, is offering your book to the subscribers as a gift. But they have to make a little task, like to make a story on their Instagram, tag Nebo Book Lab Publishing, tag us as Fantastic Talks, and I think it would be really nice to tag you also. And
Sure.
Within a week time, we will see, randomize who's gonna receive Nevernight book of Джей Крістофф. Друзі, дуже важлива інформація. Можна отримати в подарунок книжку «Безніч», хто ще не читав або хоче на подарунок. Для цього вам потрібно зняти сторіз того шматочка відео, який вам найбільше сподобався, запостити це собі в Інстаграм, відмітити Nebo Book Lab Publishing, відмітити нас, Фантастичні Токс, та можна, звичайно, відмітити Джея Крістоффа. І за тиждень ми рандомайзером отримаємо переможця.
Якщо буде точно, то,
за
будь
лайки
ласка, чекайте на офіційний пост від нас та Nebo Book Lab, де ви побачите всі вимоги і точно зрозумієте, що слід робити, аби виграти книгу. Наталя, ти щось говорила?
Так, і, власне, так, не забувайте про лайки, підписки. Це от ще один момент, який для нас дуже важливий. І дякуємо дуже за ті донати, які ви нам сьогодні скинули, які ми перекинемо для Дімки Ужасного на Старлінки. Thank you very much, Jay, for your time. It was really amazing hour that we end with you now.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. And yeah, thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you for reading my books, and thanks for spreading the word. And yeah, everyone be safe out there. The hearts of everyone that I know, and I'm sure the hearts of most of the world is with you. And so yeah, please be safe, and hopefully you guys can get back to a normal life soon. But yeah, in the meantime, thank you for reading. And hopefully you guys will get to read part 2 very soon.
Thank you once again. We're really hoping to see you one day in Ukraine, where you'll be able to sign thousands of books that are all translated in Ukrainian, and we're really hoping to read the next installments in the Nevernight Chronicles soon. Thank you once again. Любі друзі, а ми запостимо інформацію про те, скільки грошей ми зібрали уже незабаром в наших соцмережах. Будь ласка, підписуйтесь на наш канал, ставте вподобайки, залишайте коментарі. Це страшенно важливо для просування нашого каналу та для поширення, власне, україномовної фантастики у світі. А ми вам дякуємо. Гарного дня. Thank you, Jay. Have a great evening ahead of you. Take care.
You too. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.